welcome to the watercolor class. Jill Dormeyer is doing our painting for us today, although you can't see her right now because she has her picture highlighted that you're going to work on. And as you can see, it's an autumn picture, quite beautiful. So Jill, you want to take over from here, and at the end, we'll be able to look at your paintings, and Jill can talk to you about them. You can hold them up. But right now, we have her pinned. Can everybody see her screen?
Yes.
It would be helpful if you mute, because sometimes your phone rings or you have dogs or something. If you have a question, then try to remember to unmute. I will be watching the chat if you want to put anything in the chat. All right.
All right, ready? So hopefully you got the colored picture, the painting in the email or on the invitation when you registered. This is a little larger one, so depending on which size pad of paper you have, this is a little smaller. So you could have traced this picture, or this one should have been sent out as well if you needed to do 2 8.5 by 11s to get a bigger picture. But I'm going to be painting the big one, but it's going to look like this. So what we're going to do first is we need to talk through some of the colors we're going to use, because probably we don't have some of these colors. So we'll start with these oranges and yellows. So depending on what kind of palette you have, if you've got one similar to the library's palette, you only have a yellow, an orange, and a red. There's also this yellow ochre. That's a good color to use that we can use in here. And then this part, you can use either something like this color, which is a burnt sienna, to make this shadow dark down here, or do some of these dark colors. Or you may have a maroon in your palette. If you have a maroon color in your palette, you can go ahead and use that for this as well. Another way to get this darker shadow color here would be to take a red, if you have a plain red, and mix it with some black. So you could just take your little mixing dish like this, put some red in it, get some black, and put some black in it. That's a lot of black, so maybe not quite that much black. A little more red in there, and it'll get you that maroony color. So you could do something like that if you don't have a dark maroon in your palette, or if you don't have something that you would think is a good brown to use on this piece. The other color that's probably a little different is this dark green color. Same kind of thought process on this. If you don't have a dark green, so you could use either a forest green. There's another green called paraline green. If you don't have any of those, you can mix like another green, like this is a bright green, but you can mix that with black as well. A lot of black in there again. And it'll get you a darker green color. Another color to use is like a bluish green, like that. It's a little brighter. Put a little black in there. That might be a little closer to the forest green. So if you want to go ahead and do a little mixing right now, just to get that dark color, because you might have to put a combination of some colors together. So if you want to go ahead and do that in a little palette like this, just so you've got something to work with and start with. The size brushes we're going to be using today is probably your largest round brush, like this. This one is a 14. You can use, whatever your largest round is, because we've got a lot of space to cover up here. And so you're going to need a bigger brush for these areas, like down here, down here towards the bottom, and then this background up here. You're going to need the larger brush. To do some of the lines on the pumpkins and things like that, I've got a size 6. And that's gonna get some of these lines going, this part. So I did all the pumpkins with the smaller brush, and you can use like a 4 or 6, just to give you an idea. But you really only need 2. And what we'll do, Sue, if you can kind of keep an eye on the time, after about 15 minutes or so, we'll stop and let everybody kind of catch up. And like Sue said, if you have a question, use the chat or unmute yourself and ask the question. You can interrupt me, that's fine.
Okay.
We're gonna start with some oranges and yellows on our pumpkin. So we're gonna do these pumpkins first. We're gonna do first the big orange one, then we're gonna do the dark green one, then we're gonna come down here and do the speckled one, and then a more yellow one over here, and maybe a different kind of yellowy one down here. But we're gonna start this way because I want this area to dry so that we can work on this. So we're gonna do it kind of in sections like that. So again, I'm gonna start with my little brush, and our light source is coming, if you can see on this picture, kind of from the top down this direction. So it's a little lighter here. There's some highlights here. There's some highlights here, and we tried to put the shadows under there, under there, under here, under here. So if you can kind of remember that as we're painting. So we're going to start with our lightest colors and start up here. And what I did is I started with a yellow, and I just kind of did curvy lines like this. And if there's white spaces in between, it doesn't matter because we're going to be going over it again. So just kind of some yellows. A little more watery yellow, it gets lighter, so that's okay. Gives you some of those highlights. And I kind of imagine like how a pumpkin rounds, the curved lines on a pumpkin. You can take some of your yellow and maybe mix it with a little orange and get a little orangier color here as we go down and around. Maybe mix a little in over here on this side. Again, little oranges and yellows are good. If you want to start getting into more of an orangey color, if you don't have one, use that plain orange on your palette, maybe just a titch of yellow with it. It can run into the other colors. That's all fine. Since they're all kind of watery and they run together, that's perfectly fine. If you want to put a little more water on your brush, let them run. That's good. As we get down here, we're going to start going a little darker. I'm going to put a little more orange in because I can throw in some red and let it run on top of that. So I'm going to put this down. Again, if you have just a plain orange, that's fine. When you put yellow or red on top of it, that plain orange, it'll darken it or lighten it, give you those highlights if you want. I'm going to go a little bit darker, so I might mix a little of my orange or my yellow with more of a red, just to give me another shade. Oh boy, that's red. Okay, so that's probably not very pretty. So I'm going to take a little paper towel and dab. That was a little too brilliant. So water that down a lot, let it mix in with the orange so I can get rid of some of that scariness. Maybe go a little deeper. Well, that's kind of red too, but water it in because we'll get that maroony color in there, the browns and stuff too. So that'll take some of this brilliance out. So right off, it looks a little scary to me. What you could do now is we've got, like I said, we were talking about that maroon color, or if you have a burnt sienna color, or maybe a kind of a brownish color. So let's see what, you could even use some kind of, here's a brown from another palette that's kind of brown like that. You could use that. If you happen to have a maroon, a little darker like that. Otherwise, again, mix some red with some black and give yourself this darker shade here. And then you can use that to put in down here on the bottom shadowed side of your pumpkin. Draw the lines in, let it run together. I'm gonna have to paint in my darks. Again, if you have a brown in your palette, just a plain brown, you could put some of that in, let that run together, give you a little different variation in the color down on the shadow side. We'll do our stems towards the end. We're going to let this orange stuff dry so that part doesn't all run together. Maybe once in a while, a little dark up here. Make my pumpkin lines. So something like that. We'll let it dry. It'll probably dry a little lighter, so I might go back with some more of the dark down here, but for now, I think we can leave that. Let's move on to this dark green pumpkin here. So that's where we're going to take that green and black mix that we did to give us this kind of a foresty green. Depending on what palette you're using, some might have something called a forest green. That should give you about that dark green color, but you can try it on a test piece of paper. So see, it gives me that greenish color like that. It can be kind of watery for this last one. So again, we're gonna do rounded lines, light, watery first, so that we get some of those highlights. If some of it stays white, that's okay. Our light source again is coming from this direction. And get in my shadowed piece here. Might run together into my orange pumpkin because he's kind of wet yet, but that's all right. You might want to get a little more opaque. So use a little more pigment from your paint palette, maybe in another well like this, and don't put quite as much water in it. Just a little more of the green in it. And you can draw, that one might be a little too opaque. Let's look at our paper here. Well, that might not be too bad. It's watery enough. So I'm going to take those and start drawing a couple more lines in. Again, I'm just curving them like a pumpkin would kind of be. And since the paint is still wet from the previous stuff, it's going to kind of run together and meld together a little bit. So that helps. Maybe a little water on it. Run some of these. And then again, maybe a dark lines. Let them get, it's like the crevices of a gourd or a acorn squash actually is almost what this one is. A little darker down here in the shadow. So I'm going to make that a little darker. Maybe take some of my water out and just use more of the paint, opaque paint. see. I might put just a little more of that green and black in there with less water again, just because it looks like the lines aren't very distinct here. So I think this helps define it a little better. And again, do my shadow, dark underneath. Might help a little bit. I think I like a little darker lines in there to give a little more definition to the pumpkin. You'll see this, look how pale this is drying already. I'm gonna go back in there with some of that reddish black or that maroony color we made. I think I'll let it dry a little bit longer. Since we're working in this dark green palette and we made some of that fairly opaque with not a lot of water, let's make sure we dab that up, but get a little more of that, because we're gonna do this pumpkin, and you'll see on the picture, this one is very specifically defined. It's not very watered together. So we're going to want to get very opaque paint. So not near as much water as we usually have. So I'm mixing this again. It's a little drier. I'm gonna try it on my piece of paper. See, that's a little darker. I'm fine with that. Maybe I'll put a little tad more green in there. But again, not dipping my paint in water, just putting it in the green paint that's a little darker. Let's see, that's a little bit better. It's a little more green. I don't know if you can see that as well, but it's a little bit different color green. This one's a little more green than that one.
Jill, at what point do you want to stop?
Let's see, where are we? You guys want to take a break, do a little thumbs up, need a little time to catch up, or what do you want to do? Keep going, or?
Thumbs up to keep going.
Okay. So we're gonna work on this particular one. I'm gonna start with the dark lines. So they don't have to be very specific. Again, you'll see on this picture, they're kind of rough. The dark solid lines that are the crevices of the pumpkin. So they don't have to be real specific. Put one over here, maybe one back there, down to there. Little. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just the very tip of my brush in that dark color, and I'm just going to dab around in this guy. Turn your brush. You'll notice here, like if you don't turn your brush like different directions, you kind of get all pointed the same way. That probably looks kind of funny because a real pumpkin or gourd probably doesn't look like that. More white space, maybe some less white space, it's up to you. This one has a little more than my first picture did. That's all right, a little more green on it. I'm okay with that. Look at this dark one, look how that's fading so much. So I'm going to take, since I've got this pretty opaque stuff in my palette here that I just used on this, I'm going to take a little bit of water and put in it and just do a couple more lines over the lines I've already done. Again, it's up to you. A little more definition, maybe a little more down underneath here for my shadow. if you paint along the other gourd, the other pumpkin, whatever you want to call it, and go up, you'll get some of those pumpkin lines in, those curves, and it looks like the shadow's coming up from the bottom. So that might be one way to do it. You'll get that shadow underneath and then kind of swoop up. So that helps a little bit. As this green dries, to me, I think it needs a little more. So I'm gonna do a little more zigzag on my crevices down the center of them. And as we get this definition on the background, that'll kind of outline this particular pumpkin. So it might look a little stark right now, but let's see, back to our pumpkin here. Again, you can check and see how dry it is. If you put the back of your finger on it, if it's cool, then it's still pretty wet. Mine is kind of wet yet down here. Ooh, look at what I did. Ah! Oh, well, I'll fix that later, I guess. Dropped water on it. Not the best move. So down here, it's still a little cool and wet, but it's all faded out. So all my maroon color or that brownish red has kind of faded away. So I'm gonna take a little more of this black and red together. And I'm just gonna put some more of my lines in. So let's see how dark I'm getting. Maybe a little more water in there. Little dip it in the water and kind of wash these out a little. So I get my shadow underneath. Maybe needs a little more red. So I'm gonna put a little more red in there, let that run into it. So it's not too brown. So the brown and the red or the black and the red. That's what's gonna give you this color down here. A little more water on it, let it run a little bit. Dip in my color again. Kind of get some of that running around. Outline my other pumpkin. Kind of follow my rounded lines up. So that might give us a little more of that definition we were kind of looking for on the shadowed side of this big orange pumpkin. We'll see how that dries. I'm gonna try and soak up a little bit of this drop that I threw in my green pumpkin here. And take a little of my opaque green, put back in, put some lines back in, see if that helps it. Might have to go fix a little of that later because I got that big drop in there. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna move to this yellowy pumpkin. Again, I left quite a few white highlights on the top side of that. For this one, I used a yellow, and then I mixed together yellow and orange. So if you have like similar to the palette from the library that has this yellow and orange, you could mix those together in here. And it's gonna give you not necessarily orange, not necessarily yellow, but it gives you kind of that in-between color. So if you mix something similar to that, maybe a little more yellow in there, that'll give us something a little closer to some of these colors. So I'm going to start with yellow, and do some lines, leave some white. Then I'm going to come back in with that orangey yellow that I just mixed up and do some more over the top of that. And then, like I said, there's in this paint palette from the library, over here is a color called yellow ochre. If you have another palette that has something like yellow ochre or raw sienna, those are a good color. That'll give you about the same shade. And we can use that on the bottom side of this pumpkin here. So those are kind of the colors we're going to use. Again, we're going to start with just a plain yellow and start our pumpkin lines coming around. We'll wash into the oranges will come over and stuff later. So don't worry too much about that. You can leave white. Some a little darker and brighter. You'll see that the more pigment, if you get more pigment on it, it's going to be much darker, a much darker yellow than the light pale stuff. Okay, so I did some of that. Now I'm going to take that mixture of this yellow and orange and use that. And put some of that in. I'm getting rid of a lot of my white, but when this bright yellow dries, it'll probably be a lot of white in there. Might have had a little too much water on this one. As you can see right here, my lines kind of all faded into each other. I'll dab some of my water and let that dry just a little bit. We do have this little pumpkin down here. He's kind of like a yellow, kind of more of a yellow ochre color. So I'm going to take, if I have plain yellow, I'm going to take some plain yellow and mix it with just a smidgen of some brown, which is going to kind of like not a pretty green color with that particular brown. If you have a different brown in your palette, I would suggest using that. This is a brown from, I don't know what this is called. This is called raw umber. That's not a good color to use with your yellow, so just don't do that. But maybe if you find another brown, it's a little different color, but it's not as orangey. I'm going to do some with that color. I'm going to take some of my yellow, my just plain yellow, and put some of that in over the top of that brownish color. And then what you could do is, if you do have like a yellow ochre or a raw sienna, those are kind of some colors, kind of a mustardy looking yellow. I don't know what's in your particular palette, but if you have something like that, that's a good color to put in. And it gives it all just a little different shade of things. I'm gonna make mine a little more opaque. So I took the water out of my brush and dipped it directly in the palette paint and took some of the water off, put my lines back in. And since it's wet, the lines kind of fade into the others, but they still show a little curvature there. So I'm good with that. I think I'm going to leave I think on this one up here, if you look from up there, these lines are awfully red looking from above. They don't look as bad in person, but I don't like them the way they look in the camera. So what I'm going to do is take that orangey yellow that I had mixed up here, and I'm just going to try and wash some of that color out. So if I go over it with that orange yellow, it's going to blend in with it. And it's going to take the stripey out. Looks to me like long hair flying around, so that's not good on a pumpkin. Kind of fade some of the stripies out. Again, that was just a mixture of yellow and orange together, my yellow-orange color that I'm trying to do a little bit with, so it's not quite so stark. I think that helped the shadowing a little bit. Down here on this pumpkin, I think we need a little more, probably more of the yellow-orange color that we had mixed up. So again, mix your orange and your yellow if you don't have an orange, or use an orange if you've got one in your palette. Put a little bit down towards the bottom. Give him a little more orange flavor. So it's a little darker at the bottom. My plain one over here, look how it all ran together. So I lost all my highlights that I had had in my other picture. I'm going to go in with more of an orangey yellow again, maybe a little more orange than yellow on this one. So let's see how that looks on my practice paper. That's probably a pretty good color. So I'm going to take a little bit of that in here, a little yellow. And this one is still kind of cool, so I know it's got a little water still in it. It's a little wet, so it might run a little bit, and that's okay. Again, I'm going to get some of my curvature going. Leave the yellow coming through on the top. And then when I get down towards the bottom here, in my shadow, be a little more deliberate about covering that up. And then on down in the shadow part, I'm going to take a little of that yellow ochre and draw my lines up. So it goes into the rest of the pumpkin, maybe goes up a little bit. And then I get my little bit of shadow underneath there. This is pretty dry. That one's dry. So what I'm going to do is, I still don't have quite where I dropped my water here. I don't have a good shadow, I don't think. So I'm going to take some of that black green that I had mixed together, put a little water in it, and just do a little more shadow up. Try and get my lines going a little bit. Get it darker underneath. There, that helps a little. Now what I want to do is I want to put a little shadow on this speckled one. How's everybody doing? Anybody need to catch up? Give me a thumbs down if you need to catch up. Susan, can you tell me what we're looking at?
It looks like Beth thinks we need to slow down. And
okay.
We just had a couple of new people come in, Rose and April. Rose and.
Okay, so let's take a little break. And Sue, are you recording this?
Yes.
Why don't we turn the recorder off for a little bit? For speckled pumpkin or gourd. Are you ready? Susan?
Yes, I am recording.
Okay. All right, so the dark green that we used on these two, what I want you to do is get a lot of water in it to make the shadow. So I'm going to take a real watery, same color as this, and paint around the other one. Just paint up into to create the shadow. If you want to add a little more water, so like maybe I think it's too dark here, I dab my paintbrush and just kind of wipe it out. Maybe a little darker down on this side. Pull it up. So it has a little bit of shadow down here. Go a little darker down at the bottom. If you just dab it on, because it's watery and wet, it'll just fill in a little darker down towards the edge. And that gives it that depth down underneath. What we can do is take a brown color. This is the raw umber from the palette at the library. If you have, let's see, what are some other colors you might have in your palette? There might be a burnt umber, might be a good brown to use. And you can start painting our stems in. Maybe a little more opaque paint to get it a little darker, otherwise it might get very pale. You could even drop a little bit of black in there if you wanted. And then this little one down here. And we'll go in later and put in a little more stripy lines on these stems to give them a little more definition. What we can get into now is our leaves. You can use some of the same colors you used in your pumpkins here. So maybe a yellow. If you want to drop in some orange into that, or maybe even, remember the red itself was kind of a little bright. So maybe a little yellowish orange to give it a little different variation in color. Maybe this one's a little more reddish in color. Got a little close to that other one. Saw how it ran into it. It's okay. Dab off my thing. Maybe drop a little yellow in there. Give it a little different variation in color. Maybe I want to do a brownish. A orangey brown color. You could mix, if you have a brown in your palette, And you could put a little yellow and orange in with it. Might give you just a regular brown color like this. Probably needs to be a little more opaque. So I'm going to take a little more orange. Dab off my paintbrush, get a little more brown. Give myself a brown leaf. I have another leaf over here that's the same shape. I'm going to make this one the same color. Maybe I'll drop a little red in there once it dries a little bit. If I get too close to my orange one here, I'm going to try and leave a little bit of white space there, just so that they don't run together as much as this one did. But if it does run, that's probably just fine. Doesn't really do too much damage. Let's see, I have one of the yellow orangey ones over here. I'm just going to take this yellow orange that I have mixed up, paint that one out. Again, you can paint them whatever color you want. You. Maybe I'll take a little more yellow and drop into this one down here just to give them a little brilliance. Run into that orange a little bit. Here's another one. This is a little purer orange. It's going to run into my other leaf probably. And maybe into the brown a little bit. I'll paint this out and maybe drop a little bright yellow in there just to give it that variation. Or maybe I'll leave that. Looks kind of good next to the red one. And then, since I made this mistake on this, drop this yellow glob on this leaf over here. I'm just going to go in with yellow. This leaf goes off the page. Looking at my stems. I'm going to take, if you have a dark brown or a black, you could mix a little bit of black in with a brown and get it a darker color like this. So it's like a dark brown. You may have a dark brown in your palette. Again, it could be called, let's see, it could be a burnt umber. But if not, if you have a lighter color brown, you can mix that with a little black like we did the reds and the greens. And I'm just going to take the very tip of my brush and make a couple lines on my stem. Might seem a little dark, so I might dab that up a little bit. But again, just a couple lines on the stem, just to give it a little definition. This one looks like it's still kind of wet. Let's see how it works. It's going to be a little bit different for me because it's kind of running together. That's all right. There's a little rounded top on that. All right, how's everybody doing? Okay to move on? my water spots.
I'm looking at everyone. I don't see anybody saying, whoa.
Slow down. Okay.
Stop. Put your hand up and see. Like, whoa, stop.
Whoa.
I don't see it.
Okay, we'll keep going. So what we're going to do now is we are going to work on our background up here. So I'll show you the picture. I'll try and get this a little closer. So this is where the salt comes in. Did y'all get your salt? If not, run to your kitchen and grab some salt. You can use table salt, you could use kosher salt, you could use sea salt. But what we're going to do is we're going to do this background. And this is going to be that wet on wet that Debbie had us doing quite often. So what we're going to do is take that biggest round brush that I had you get out of your paintbrushes, and we are going to turn this upside down because all my paint down here is wet and I'm going to put my arm in it, and I don't need to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is take water, and we're going to outline our picture here, but we're going to get this wet. And you might have to go over it a couple times with just water. The colors we're going to use in it are that yellow ochre color and the bright sap green. So that's like either, it could be a sap green, it could be a bright green, and then we're going to use a little of that evergreen color, that dark color. So those are the three colors I'm putting in here. So if you want to kind of look in your palette and see if you've got something similar to that. So it's probably more this yellow ochre, brownish yellow color, a little bit of this dark green color, and then that bright sap green, which we used to mix with the black, but we didn't use the bright green up here. So starting with water, plain water, I am doing my whole background, just water, 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 getting it. Sometimes if you look at it from an angle, you can see that it's shiny. That's what you want to see, is like really wet. And go around your pumpkins. I ran into my yellow there a little bit. You'll see my background's getting kind of colored like that. That's all right. Don't worry too much. Water, 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 water. A lot of water on this one. It might make your paper ripple a little bit, but that can be flattened out once it dries. Okay, so I'm getting close to my leaf, trying to make sure I don't get too close to my pumpkins or my leaves, because I want to keep them a little defined. I don't want them to run too much. If they run a little bit, that is not anything like that. That's not anything to worry about. That's just going to happen. You never know, it might add some interest to your picture. So water, 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 water. Then I'm going to go back over where I started over here, because sometimes this is already drying and we want that to stay shiny wet. So I'm going to, again, look at it from an angle, and you can see that it's still shiny. If it's shiny, you're good. If not, hit it with another coat of water, because you want it shiny. Because if you don't keep it shiny, the color won't flow around like you're going to want it, and the salt won't work very, very well. So those are the two things that make it important. So I'm kind of getting close to my leaves up here, making sure it's shiny. Okay, it looks like my background up here is all on the top, is all shiny. So I'm going to take, again, that light colored green that I used, and with my big brush, get it pretty watery, and I'm just going to start dropping in. This is getting a little dark. I'll just put more water, move it around a little more. Get it in the water. Dip my brush in some water so it's maybe not so vivid green. Okay. Now we're gonna do that kind of yellow ochre-y color. So again, that's kind of that, not the bright yellow, but although bright yellow would be okay here too, because if you have bright yellows down here like this, if you use bright yellows up with your greens, that'll look just fine as well. I'm going to use this color. So you'll see it's kind of, I'm just letting it run around in between the green, mixing with the green, doesn't matter. But my paper's dry on the edge here, I can tell. So I'm going to go back and just kind of wet that. Then I wanted to use that dark greenish black color. So the green and the black that I had mixed together, that color, that's what I'm going to put in here as well. I didn't do that on the other picture. I didn't make it quite that dark, but I like that dark color. And so I might not use much of it. I'm going to get it very watery. And just drop some of the dark in. Because that's going to bring out and kind of match the dark on my pumpkins or my gourds down there. Okay. So here comes the fun part. Whew, that was a lot. Trying to get a little more ochre in there. Okay. So I've got some colors on there. It's all shiny and wet yet, so that's all good. Now comes my salt. So get your salt and take a pinch of salt, and I'll show you kind of here. I'm going to take some between my fingers and I'm just going to start sprinkling it on my paint color. And you'll see, because it's so wet, you'll see the outline of the salt crystals. So I'll see if I can zoom this in a little bit. So this is kind of how it's going to look when the salt falls on there. You'll know it's wet enough because the water and the moisture is absorbing into your salt crystals, which makes them look like this. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's going to be out of focus or not. This is kind of how it's looking right here. This is going to stay wet for a really long time. So what you might want to do is be really careful for the next couple hours, because this stays wet. I tried that before when I did the first one, and it stayed wet for a really long time. So it had to be a little careful with that. But that's all you need for the background on the top part. Let me zoom out here again a little. So I'm just going to leave that. And then I can work on the bottom background, all of this stuff down here. I can see my leaf over here is still awfully wet. So I'm going to start up on this area. And if you look at the picture, what we did here is we used some of the same colors. We used some brown, some red, orange, yellows. That maroon color, the red and the black mixed. But with that, on this section down here, I didn't add any salt to it. I left that plain. And it kind of blends in with some of this leaf color here. So what I'm going to do there is, What color am I going to start with? I'm going to start over here, do some of this background. So I'm going to mix probably some of the browns that I had used on that leaf there. I'm going to put some of that in here. And I'm just going to fill in. If I overrun on my leaves on this section of it, I'm back to my smaller brush, by the way, just because it's a little closer work than up on the background up here. So I moved to my smaller brush. I may take a couple little other colors and throw in there and let that run around. Use the brown. I'm gonna do down here. I see one of my leaves down here is kind of wet yet, so we'll see if it runs together or not. It's all right. Maybe take a little of my orange color, put in. That was a little more yellowy. Maybe I'll try one of my oranges. Let that run. Looks like I need some more brown in there because I don't like that. Mix a little more brown in with that orange, just so you can see the shape of my leaves. I could use that reddish maroon color that I had mixed up. Put a little of that in. I could use some of that dark greenish, the forest green or that dark green color that I put on these pumpkins here. I could use some of that down here. Again, if the colors run together, it's probably better. Looks nice. And then if you want to drop in like other colors to make it look a little more interesting, you can. See how that runs. Looks like this got awful light in there, so I'm going to darken that up like that. Because again, this is kind of underneath or on the bottoms of the pumpkins and stuff, so I kind of wanted a little different color. If I have maybe a little more red, foresty red, I could put some of that in. More of the green over here. More of my maroon red. Again, if I have that dark brown mixed up. Brown in there. Trying to go with a little different color next to the leaf and the pumpkins, just so there's a little more variety in there. This, it looks like my orange leaf is running with my brown. That's okay. Might end up with a really pretty color down there. Dropping in just a little brown. I kind of like the brown down there, like the stem color brown that we had done. So I'm getting that a little darker. More of the green. See if it's too light anywhere. If it's too light, I'm going to put a little of the dark in again, just to keep a little more definition down here. For example, this I think is too light. Put a little more of that dark in. Let that run around a little bit. I still have a little bit up here by this. So I'm going to take some of my dark colors. I think I'll do this. Red-black mixture, that maroonish color. These leaves. That green in, that black green color. Maybe drop a little of that orangey red in there, just to see what that does. This is where my background to the top part kind of washes in. I'm just gonna take a little bit of this and kind of, and then you'll see I might have a little bit of a line there. I'm gonna take I took my brush, wiped it off and dried it. And if I come back towards my wet paint, it kind of blends the color in a little bit. So it's not so stark. I can see my top background up here. It is very, very bubbly and wavy, but it is really, really wet yet. So moving it, it's going to be a little difficult. It might run a little bit, so make sure you let it dry. But again, let's see what the salt is doing to it. So see here what the salt is doing. It's soaking up the color and making different shapes in your background. It's behaving a little bit differently because it was drier here. I don't know if you can see that. So this one made real big kind of blossoms. And then this over here, the screen made little ones because it was drying already. And then over here, I don't have any because it was too dry. And so the salt wasn't taking and soaking it up. So it behaves differently, but it gives you an interesting texture. Okay, so I'm looking at my, oh, let me zoom back out here. So I am looking at my leaves down at the bottom. And in my mind, this particular one is pretty bland and boring. So I'm going to take my darker brown that I did and used on some of my stems here. So again, you can mix, if you have a lighter brown, you can mix it with some black and get that dark brown color. So it's a deep, deep brown. I'm going to draw some lines in this. I have the same leaf up here. I'm going to do the same kind of thing. Get a little deeper color. A little variation. What I may do with this orange leaf is I may get a more opaque yellow. See if that shows up. That doesn't show up. Never mind. Maybe what I'll try is more of this maroon red over here. So that's my red-black combination. See what that does. That's pretty brilliant. Might need to water that down a little bit. So maybe I'm making more of a red leaf. A little more water on my brush. Wash it out towards the edge. A little more. Make some of the veins maybe like a leaf would have. So kind of like that. That gives it a little more dimension. This particular leaf, I'm going to take a little more of that yellow ochre color. Again, like I can soften these edges if I want by just drying my brush like this, rinsing it off, drying it, and then coming back in and going against what I just painted, going the opposite direction. And it kind of gives it some of the color, but it softens that edge a little bit. So these edges are sharp. I left them sharp on the two brown leaves, but then on this leaf, I tried to soften that a little bit. So you could do something like that. I think that helps the variation in the color a little bit. The other thing I might do still is my definition on this particular pumpkin. Make my shadow a little darker on the bottom. I am actually going in with more of that yellow ochre from the paint palette. So these are just kind of fixes I'm doing on something that I don't like. So once it's drying and I don't think I'm particularly pleased with the color, or the way it turned out, I'm going back in and I'm trying to change it a little bit, make it look a little more like in my mind what I was thinking. This one I'm going in with more of that yellow orange and making it more of an orange pumpkin. Now this isn't a straight orange. You could do a straight orange, but this is more the yellow orange, and I might do something like this. And then maybe I'll take my orange from the palette. Let's see what that color looks like, and just come in down here a little bit for my shadow. And you'll see how it kind of blends into the wet paint that I just put down. But it makes, since it's a little bit darker, gives it more of that little shadow kind of thing. So I'm getting my letting it kind of run up into the other stuff, giving it that depth that you're looking for.